Several weeks ago, Michael Spindler and I posted a message to all of you about the directions that Apple is taking as we move forward into the 1990s. This is still a tough and challenging industry, but Apple continues to do well. We wanted to give you an update on this and to let you know that our strategy has not changed since we began this new course almost 2 years ago. But our commitment is still focused first on our core business, Macintosh.
Yeah, John, I think that's extremely important to keep in mind that any future progress building Apple from a one product / business company into a multi-business company starts with not blinking on the Macintosh. And we have proven over the last 20 months how to effectively compete in an ever-increasing competitive environment driven by signs of commoditization in hardware. We have proven to be able to put out product in faster cycles and win in the marketplace.
Well, that's true, Michael, and we have gained significant market share. We have reduced our time to market from 2.5 years down to under 12 months. We are ramping to global volume much faster because we are a global business. We've been able to get much more productivity out of our R&D investment, and our field organizations are doing a terrific job of giving us strong momentum in the marketplace. So it is working. Macintosh is strong. It's our core business today. It will be in the future. And we couldn't even think about going into some of the new ventures that we're interested in unless we had strength in our core business.
Yeah. I mean, talking about new ventures, this has certainly stirred interest and here and there controversy. People wonder where we get from one stage to the other, and I think we will have time to go through this a little bit more in detail as the program unrolls here. But let's drill back to the Macintosh. I think that it isn't over with the heated competition. I think that we are really seeing hardware progress in terms of the other category of technology. The Intel Microsoft domain, 486 machines in color will enter the marketplace soon at very low price points. And we are not immune from this roller coaster in the marketplace where we see new channels emerging. Customer behavior is different. They, in a more maturing marketplace, they buy from new channels in a very different way. Just 9 months ago, we haven't seen some of the packet bells being enforced in the marketplace. So we have to be very vigilant and not rest on the success we have. I mean, people congratulate on the strategy that we've put in place and stuck with this and executed this. We have done this with a certain amount of pain. I think the organization is feeling pain in terms of where's the resource and how can I do all these things that apparently needed to be done. So I think I'm absolutely aware of this level of pain that got created, but we're winning with this. So it is not easy by no means, and we should not let loose on working hard and pushing this Macintosh forward in notebooks and desktops and build out this property, move software faster, do new exciting things, and get the market growing.
Well, Michael, you and I both had dinner recently with our resellers in the United States. In fact, these were CEOs of resellers who represented about $2 billion of Apple sales. And the thing that really struck me was that they were looking at us as the only bright light in the entire industry. That they said, you've got innovative products, your products are selling, they are differentiated.
To me, these people were very clear and forceful in their opinion about Apple is a bright spot that has a future, pointing out into leveraging our technology, building different things, and yet compete in the hardcore of what it is today. And what we saw in the last 6-9 months in the Intel Microsoft category is a brand displacement. Not that this market has grown tremendously. It is just what used to be IBM and Compaq moving through a channel called reselling is now Packard Bell and Dell Computer in a different channel. So the overall market in that category didn't grow all this much. We grew because we found that we still have differentiation in the Macintosh and elasticity in the marketplace, and we can sell it for a little more than all these other clone brands. Not this should make us all complacent, but I think that we still can create, but we must create it faster, real innovation to let the market grow. To me, it is not so much important that we see this picture of less gross margin. What we have to do is make this a growth business. then we have more sufficient resource to create other things, including pushing the Macintosh forward.
Well, I think one of the things we've learned over the last 2 years is that we can still make good profits at lower gross margins. We had thought in the past that the only way to make high profits was to have high growth industry, high gross margins. What we've learned is that when we can dramatically compress the time to market and build what we call hit products, which are products that really help sell themselves, that those products are able to give us a very high return, even at lower gross margins, because there's less marketing effort behind those products to get high volumes. The challenge is from an implementation standpoint, which means that worldwide manufacturing has to ramp up many products simultaneously around the world. It means that we have to have follow-on products that come on very quickly. So we're proud that we have the ability to get products out in under a year, but we know we have to get that probably down to products coming out every 6 months. So the focus is really going to be continually in the 1990s for Macintosh on better and better implementation, and it means that we have to hit on all 12 cylinders all the time, and that's tough on all of us, but that's the name of the game right now.
Yeah. Well, I think that some of this has really worked well, and thanks to all the efforts across the world and in all parts of the organization. This principle of hit products, we learned from this. I mean, we saw over a year ago that the classic hits the sweet spots in the installed base in this price band of $1,000 to $1,500 in black and white. And this was the fastest selling product we ever had. This year it's different. It's the LC, because we finally get the market to understand what an LC is. We all of a sudden see surprises that the CI is in high demand. The Quad is doing, I would say, reasonably well, because again, people have to, in this sector of the market, being adjusted to what the complexity and functionality is of 700 and 900 quads, but it's doing well. And last but not least, the PowerBooks. We've been late to this market called notebooks, and this is the winner, right?
Yeah. Well, in fact, in the U.S. in the first quarter, Apple went from not even being in the industry of notebooks to #1 in the entire industry in the United States for PowerBooks, with 25% market share, which is pretty impressive.
Yeah.
But the thing which I think is going to be really challenging for all of us is watching the forecasting of all of these different products. Now that we have such a wide range of Macintoshes, it's very hard to know which one of these is going to really be a big seller. And the tuning of the pricing becomes key. You remember when we brought out the Mac Classic, it just took off. We came out with the Classic 2. The product was a little bit high priced for the market, and we didn't get the kind of sales that we expected. On the other hand, we were out of stock on PowerBooks and out of stock on CIs and SIs. So balancing this all out is really a tremendous implementation task for us around the world.
I mean, the art of forecasting is never going to be less than a challenge. I think that we can learn from some of these things that we say. If you make a product revision, you're putting more functionality or power into a design center, that we got to keep this at the same price in the original model. So the Classic 1 to Classic 2, we shouldn't have increased the price just because it is an 030 based product. So we have to learn from these little effects to not get this up again rather than down. So driving the price points is okay if it creates more marketplace and it's clearly differentiatable. And the product line gets broader but more understood. We segment these product lines so we can address new channels and have the addressable market being much wider than just marketing to our installed base. This is not good enough in the Macintosh business.
Yeah, I think what's impressive with the Macintosh performance right now is that this is really global performance. I just came back from Japan recently, was at Macworld. A year ago, we had 61,000 attendants at Macworld, Tokyo. This year, 150,000. A year ago, there were...
It beats San Francisco.
Absolutely. It's the largest Macworld we've ever had in the world by double. And this year, we went from 50 Mac user clubs in Japan to 300 Mac user clubs. The momentum that Apple is enjoying in Japan is really unprecedented because the Japanese computer industry is in a real tailspin at the moment, and they're down almost 30%. We're up over 40%, and the Japanese computer executives are just scratching their heads saying, you know, how does Apple do this? Well, it's great products, it's great people, it's great implementation, it's all things coming together. And fortunately, we're seeing this in Latin America, Southeast Asia, in Europe, United States, Canada, you know, right across the world. So this is positive. On the other hand, we can't paint the picture too bright because the industry is tough. It's not growing as fast, the prices are coming down, and it only gets harder, unfortunately, as we move out into the 1990s.
It's not over with. I mean, two comments to what you said. One is that what still matters is brand recognition, and Apple just stands out. This example of Japan is just really eye-opening. We couldn't be more NEC-ish than NEC in Japan. We had to be Apple, and this is a winning proposition because people like to be involved with this kind of product, be it from a reselling end or a user point of view. So brand still matters. Design still matters. The PowerBooks are just great products because they're ergonomically designed. We put communication in, which we will probably talk more about how important communication is to us in the future. So design matters. Everything has to run. I mean, you talked about these 12 cylinders. Everything has to work. I would second saying it's not over. The clone people will not roll over. They have clearly stated whatever it takes for them to compete, they will do. In other words, the price game and war isn't over yet. I have no illusion that as we go forward that we have to somewhat respond if these people go crazy and fight for their lives. It doesn't mean for us suicide. I don't believe this. If we can still put innovation into the Macintoshes, I believe we can going forward. We can grow the marketplace. So it's not necessary that margin drops be disastrous. I think we have to translate the advances of technology into market growth to address new users.
Well, we have made tremendous progress in the education market, particularly in the last 2 years. We've completed the transition from Apple II over to Macintosh. That's a solid footing. It's really an annuity business for us going forward, and there's a lot of opportunity to expand it. We're doing well in the home. We're doing well with home office. We're doing well with small business. But in large business, it seems to get harder for us, Michael. And it looks like at this time that Windows is making a lot of progress in large business, that even if it's not as good as Macintosh, some of these customers say, I don't care. It's open. The hardware is cheap. It connects into everything else. Why don't you talk a little bit about what we're doing in the enterprise world to address that issue?
I think that it's a critical factor for Apple's future growth and success. It's been hard to win in large corporations, any place in the world, in mission-critical applications where really corporations put the trust into Apple and say, we're going to run parts of our company on network Macintoshes. What we've been successful with was putting Macintosh into the creative aspect of these companies in their sales and marketing and publishing departments, because this was all about graphical applications and it stands synonymous with publishing. Those were the inroads we made into large corporations. And three things happened in the last couple of years in there. One is still a mentality of mapping PCs into mainframes, i.e. terminal to mainframe connection. That's what the real success of DOS was, is all these clone machines in very simple functionality, no graphical user interface, mapped into a terminal mode into an existing mainframe box. The second thing that occurred was technical computing in the engineering departments around Unix. That's the success story of Sun and the likes, HP Apollo. And the third was a PC to PC type environment where the non-computer users, so to speak, the power users, created that structure. So there are three different environments that happen in large enterprises, overlooked by the IS director, if you want. And this is going to change over time into a much, much more distributed environment, client-server architecture, the real architecture. Nobody has this, which is our chance, because we're not going to map it into an old structure. We're trying to build a client-server architecture where we really can shine and build some specific solution sets, moving the Macintosh upwards, if you want. We never had a declared server strategy. We will have one. And that, if you reference again to this reseller meeting, they said finally the pieces are falling together. And that's also, I guess, in this whole space where the IBM relationship will play most, and that's what it's designed for.
Yeah, the thing I heard from the resellers was they said, you know, get this story out with what you're doing, because your short-term strategy, your long-term strategy makes sense. We now understand, you know, even clearer why you're doing this with IBM in the enterprise market. The story has to be told. And you've been working very closely with IBM, I know, in the implementation of several parts of the IBM Alliance. Maybe you can just bring people up to date on how that's doing.
Yeah, well, the first three sort of more immediate and critical pieces was, number one, create a very powerful and sustainable RISC architecture. And we will productize this in the Macintosh as we move most of the Macintoshes onto RISC platforms.
Yeah, I think the key thing that people may not be aware of is that Apple is the only personal computer company that said we're going to move our entire product line over to RISC. And the reason we selected IBM, because there were many other RISC processors we could have selected, everyone else was going for superscalar, 64-bit, the most performance they could get at any cost. We were interested in taking their know-how with physical sciences and drive this thing down so that we could be able to put it on an LC or a classic.
Yeah, you can even see this in today's announcement of digital with this Alpha chip. It's a 64-bit superscalar single chip used in high-end workstation. That's fine, but it's not what we want.
It's got nothing to do with our market.
What we want is to take the promise of RISC technology and siphon this on into very, very low-cost, exciting products where software, again, makes a difference. For us, RISC in Macintosh is not to run applications faster, is that we need an underlying, more performing platform to do all these wonderful things that we've worked through ATG into the software group, i.e. speech, 3D, new architecture, graphics, all these new, what we call natural classes of human interfaces that Apple stands for to build out, to create new applications and new marketplaces. And that's the fundamental promise that we have to deliver to, is build the marketplace rather than stagnate, and that it's only a price game, and this is not very fun.
Yeah, I think what Microsoft has proven is that if you don't bring innovation to the industry, the applications don't add new functionality, and the industry slows down. Right. And so the only way we can drive the industry growth again is to keep stretching the hardware platform so that we can show off the software. Right. And that's why the RISC is so important to us.
So that's one thing, and we make really good progress in the CDC, which is the Customer Design Center in Austin. The three main projects defined, which are the publicly discussed chips.
Now, I think in the Custom Design Center, we're up to almost 100 employees. Is that right?
More than that, and there are 3 chips designs running in parallel right now that are described for a low-end product, a mainstream personal computer product, and some more high-end.
So this will give us the broadest range of choice of RISC processors of any platform.
As far as we can see, yes. So that's one thing that's well underway. It's staffed. People are on schedules. We're having weekly working meetings between Apple people who are on site in the CDC. We have a person being inside the CDC, plus 8 others, contributing to the design work. That's well under the way. The second thing that is very important for us, which gives us immediate entry into large business, is the interoperability initiative. We announced that last year, and we've shipped already 2 products, which were actually ahead of schedule. One was the token ring connection from AppleTalk, which we did ourselves by licensing IBM's token ring chips, and one is their router product, which they put in the marketplace. So those are 2 visible pieces of that this works, and it was important to them too. And there will be about 5 to 6 products that enter the market this year that are done either at Apple or at IBM. The third thing is building open systems by creating this client-server platform. And for us, a server isn't just sort of a general-purpose server. What we want to do is building a balanced architecture between Macintosh clients and higher-ended server machines could go after a specific environment in data distribution or in image processing or in media type distribution, and link these 2 systems and do something to usability and usefulness. And one of the things I might say is the first System 6000 we got into here, just because we need them for compiler work, we looked at that and saying we wouldn't do an implementation like that. So when people ask the question, by the time you have open systems and IBM will build them, and Bill will build them, and other people who will go out into the PowerPC platform, how do you differentiate? Just the fact that I could see some of these IBM products or other products, we will never make an implementation like that. So there's still much, much room for us to innovate, even if we open up through Unix-based systems the world of servers by transiting the applications environment of a Mac into. And so the price to open is a higher resource system than the native Macs that are absolutely crisply built to get the maximum out of the performance of RISC for personal computing systems.
Now, you've covered 3 of the 5 initiatives with IBM: PowerPC, interoperability, PowerOpen. There are 2 others, joint venture companies. The first one is Taligent, which is the object-based systems company, which now is up and running. We have a management team in place. The incorporation has been completed, the public announcements made, and they are now officially a joint venture corporation owned equally by IBM and Apple. So that's off to a good start. A lot of people really aren't clear, though, what is the product that Taligent is building. And I think the best way to describe it is that they are trying to address a very different problem than today's personal computers are capable of doing. And the problem they're trying to address is one that has to do with enterprise markets, where large MIS shops spend 85 to 90% of their annual budget on maintenance of existing applications and systems. What intelligence technology promises is the ability to compress that time down by a factor of 10, to reduce the cost by probably a factor of 10, to increase the reliability and allow you to have customized solutions in the 1990s as we had shrink-wrapped applications in the 1980s, and to do all of that with the same elegance of a user interface as we were able to apply to the Macintosh. And all of that will be very complementary to what we do with Macintosh. So by the mid-1990s, when Intelligent is there, we expect that the hardware platforms will have enough memory so that you'll see actually maybe two environments existing on the same system in an enterprise market, so that it will be Macintosh System 7 or whatever version we're in at that time, with a complementary Intelligent, which can work on customized solutions. And this will all be part of a client-server world. And the real way to judge, I think, the Apple-IBM relationship is client-server. But the reason we did it was enterprise markets. The other one was our joint venture company with IBM on multimedia called Kaleida. The tremendous runaway success we're having with QuickTime has meant that we've had to make sure that we really understood well where QuickTime was going to go over the next 2, 3, 4 years, where Kaleida goes. And I think we've worked out those details with IBM so that those two things are going to be very complementary. What we're going to do is take QuickTime as a layer of technology, not only the Macintosh, but move parts of that technology across to other platforms to head off Microsoft from trying to set the standard too low, and therefore close out the opportunity for QuickTime to really become a pervasive technology, much the way PostScript has become a pervasive technology. On the other hand, Kaleida adds in a scripting language, a consumer operating system. It also adds in a common data format so that content that's developed for IBM computers or Apple computers will be able to play on both machines. So this venture is also taking shape very rapidly. And I'd say overall the IBM relationship still looks very positive now, about 6 or 7 months later.
I think it's validating some assumptions we made when you look around what happens in other risk environments such as MIPS/ACE, how Sun is able to pull off some of the developments they have to do. So from a risk standpoint, that was probably a good decision moving forward, and everything else that matter too. We still have to do most of our own work. I mean, there is, as I said, room for product differentiation, even if you try to get to common grounds in what we call in this relationship enabling technologies. I like to go back to QuickTime. This is a big deal, and I think for the first time, I personally believe that multimedia is real. When we saw things that we have done in previous years on the multimedia lab, you had to have 10 technicians come in, cable it up, and set it up, and you would never get this into a framework of head and saying, I am able to do all this thing. Right now, I believe all the pieces are falling into place, and it is as simple and compelling as when we had desktop publishing come in. So you immediately get it. In QuickTime, when I listen to our developer group, is the fastest piece of software adoption for developers since the original introduction of the Macintosh.
Yeah, let's just take a moment to make sure everyone understands what QuickTime is. QuickTime is software. It deals with something that was never designed into personal computers in the early years, and that is time synchronization, so that you can take animation and video and graphics and text and sound and be able to synchronize this together. It also has compression algorithms built into it so that you can handle video and animation, which tend to take a lot of memory, and compress that down. But it's designed in a way that you can take out our compression algorithms and substitute in others as they may be developed in future years. So it's a very scalable architecture. The applications are shielded from the compressors, so you can make substitution without having to write new drivers. Same thing is true with the component manager, which allows you to control laser discs or CD-ROM drives or camcorders, again, shielding the application from what those devices are, so you don't need special drivers for it. So it's a very scalable architecture. When we introduced it in December, a few weeks later, we had 120 applications at Macworld in San Francisco. By the time we showed up in Tokyo, just about a month later, we were up to over 230 applications. So the speed at which this is being adopted, and it's going from education, K-12, education, higher ed, training, personal productivity, presentations. It's the most pervasive technology that we've had since the introduction of the Macintosh and desktop publishing.
The one mistake we could do with this, again, is to holding it to ourselves. And if you look around, what's there in the competitive field isn't there. So the wrong thing would be to hold it close to us. And as you laid it out, we want to take the best implementation in the system on the Macintosh, but let this layer travel across other platforms, so on Windows or Unix. And therefore, we build a QuickTime layer across the entire industry. The whole infrastructure around titles, distribution of software in multimedia through this QuickTime layer, but the best implementation on CD-based Macintoshes, as it will come out this year, is an offering that's crisp, and we can brand QuickTime and saying that it becomes synonymous, a la like PostScript, across multiple platforms.
Yeah. Well, if you remember back in the 1980s, we used to try to do everything ourselves and then keep the technology to ourselves. In the 1990s, it's very clear that we have to drive the innovation in the industry because no one else is going to step up to the plate and do it. And we have got to have very rapid time to market because that's the way that we are able to compete as we move a technology like QuickTime over to play on other people's machines. Mm-hmm. But if we don't put it out on other people's machines, then what happens is we get isolated like an island, and we'll discover that stuff that is less good will appear out there, and we'll lose the ISVs, and they'll be out developing on that, and we'll miss another great opportunity. So we're going to move these technologies as rapidly as we can cross-platform.
I think also one of the reasons of the stagflation of this industry right now is far less the recessionary trends we have throughout the world. I mean, for instance, the economics of Australia and Canada are so dismal, we call this depression, and yet we're able to increase our market share tremendously and sell 30–40% more volume in those territories.
Well, it's incredible. I mean, Australia, which is in a depression, we're up 48%.
Yeah, in units.
And Japan, which is a market down almost 30%, we're up over 40%. Mm-hmm. And Canada, we're seeing the same thing. The U.S., we're gaining share. Europe, we're gaining share. Latin America, we're booming. So we are showing incredible performance around the world in a very, very tough environment.
But that is actually the expense of the other brand leaders. So in the U.S., for instance, we have constantly increased our share in the U.S. reseller channel. And that's by far the most important distribution channel to the marketplace. Yet we see other phenomena coming off, like mass merchandisers and superstores. We cannot ignore this trend. So we're not going to walk out of the work we've been doing over years and years with the U.S. reseller base, but we got to look at segmenting our product line to make it easier to segment that into the channel mapping. And that's work going on with Bob Poett's organization and, as a matter of fact, in other parts of the world to build out this complicated channel matrix and make sure that we don't trip over each other and just don't substitute dollars that were sold over here in this part of the channel, sold over here, and then we don't win. We have to have this as an additive strategy, but not sort of close our eyes in front of the phenomenon that superstores are around, actually be moved into them. The CompUSA thing, we're adding a couple of more. We're looking at Sears, we're looking at some of the mass merchandising channels, but we're not going to run into it without consultation with first ourselves and our channel partners today. So there's lots of work going on in expanding our channels to reach more users, make stuff more affordable, more exciting as we move up in the software space in Macintosh and, as I said, in the enterprise computing era. Why don't you talk a little bit about some of the things you said in Las Vegas and other events so people get a more framework of what this means?
Well, I think, first of all, many people at Apple may be surprised to know that one of the largest brands in the United States is Packard Bell. No, not Compaq, IBM, but Packard Bell. And the reason they're so large but almost unnoticed is you don't see them in our traditional reseller channels, but they're in a lot of these new emerging channels, and these new emerging channels, which weren't even a factor 18 months ago, now represent almost 50% of the sales of the personal computer industry in the United States. And I've never seen a change in an industry take place as rapidly as this. So we've said that we're going to go into those consumer channels. We're going to bring Macintosh down into those markets because we've got a great brand name and we already have a good franchise in the home market. We see a huge opportunity in home offices, but they want low-cost products in those low-cost channels. So we're going to bring out a low-cost implementation of the Macintosh later this year, 1992, with built-in CD-ROM drive, and will take advantage of our latest technology, such as QuickTime. And as we move out into 1993, most of our desktop machines will be CD-ROM capable, and they will be fully able to take advantage of the QuickTime technology. So we think we can get the kind of differentiation on the desktop that we did this past Christmas selling season with the PowerBooks, with the product you carry around. So that was the first part of our announcement.
Yeah, I think the display with CD-ROM is important. A couple of years ago, we felt that every personal computer ought to have a hard drive, and this was a big deal at the time, and now we don't even think about it. And I think the same thing is with CD-ROMs, that today we believe that, you know, is it really right? I think in a couple of years from now, every computer has a CD-ROM built in, because it is a very, very effective mechanism to distribute software and to distribute information rather than having diskettes and lots of books. So I think that in itself is a huge market opportunity before we even get to the multimedia titles, and that will be over time even on networks. So why don't you explain this a little bit?
I think what's what really got us to make the decision to become proactive with CD-ROM drives was the quick success of our QuickTime technology, because developers looked at this and they said, now we can build applications that have value, you know, but we need a platform out there so we can get a return on the investment. And until Apple said that we were going to build this into our base level machines, there wasn't going to be enough installed base out there for the content developers to be able to make a return on it. Well, we've made that announcement. We're going aggressively after it. In the past, there are only 1 million installed base in the world of CD-ROM drives, 360,000 sold in 1991. About 4.5% of Macintoshes have CD-ROM drives, so that's very, very small. On the other hand, when we say we're going to put these into most of our desktop machines, and probably eventually all of our desktop machines, along with the QuickTime technology, that's a very powerful story to the content developers. And what we're seeing is a terrific response to the content developers. And what we're trying to do is to make sure that we take the high ground on QuickTime before Microsoft has their multimedia CD-ROM conference, because what they will do is to set the standard much lower and drag away those developers who would otherwise be in our platform unless we become proactive. And that's why we have really said we're going on the offense. Michael, the other thing we talked about at CES, which is the Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas, was that Apple was going to go into the personal electronics business. And by that, we were very clear to say we had no interest to go into today's consumer electronics industry. In fact, if you read the papers recently, you see that the Japanese consumer electronics leaders are actually showing tremendous plunge in profits, down 50%, down 80%, as the case may be. The problem is there are no hit products in traditional consumer electronics today. But the industry is about to make a transition from analog technology to digital technology. With digital technology, you need software. You also need a great user interface know-how. And the skill that Apple brings to all of this is that we understand user-centered devices. We know how to make them appealing in design. We've had some terrifically exciting technology. We've just recently demonstrated some of it with handwriting, with gesture, with speech, with QuickTime multimedia. So we have lots of exciting innovation that we can bring into this industry, but we're going to use a different financial model than we did with Macintosh. With Macintosh, we said, we'll invest everything ourselves, we'll keep it to ourselves. With personal electronics, what we're saying is that we will share the risk, we will share the investment. There'll probably be a wide range of different products out there. We can't predict with accuracy which ones are going to be the most popular areas, but we know that once we see some experience out there of what people want, that we've got technologies that will let us build families of these products. Yeah. We may sell these products ourselves because the Apple name is a very powerful name, but other people will be selling them too. So we build both a software technology revenue stream as well as the finished good products revenue stream.
I think when we demonstrated this Knowledge Navigator some years ago, people were very skeptical whether this was the pipe dream of the year 2000. I think that what's apparent more and more is that most of these technologies that were presented in there are real and are productizable in very, very, very near future. So I think that having a vision of building more and more personalized products, which is very clear to Apple's mission and the guts of this company, is to be really driven by what turns on users. Whether you build it in large systems or ones you carry with you all the time, I think that's where we stand out. And what people envy us for. This new brave world of telecom being high-speed digital networks, allowing content to be digitized and shifted over networks point-to-point in two ways, allows probably a whole new fleet of products to come out, highly software-driven, digital-type devices, which is very different than the notion of consumer electronics a la yesterday, which was analog and not very user-friendly. Witness the VCR-type program we all have to get this thing running and using all the functionality. I think what the market values is really functional products that do things for customers, do it immediately, do it simple, and do it affordable. That's, I think, where the sweet spot is.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. The big difference between a personal computer, even a great one like the Macintosh, is that it's a general-purpose machine. Requires some level of skill to be able to operate it. With a personal electronics product, what we call a personal digital assistant, or PDA, what we're really looking at is a particular usefulness. It's focused to do some particular thing, and it has to be very usable. It's been amazing, Michael, the kind of response that we've gotten since we made the announcements at CES. We showed QuickTime at Macworld, and then we talked about Apple's interest to move into telecommunications at Harvard. We have been inundated with companies that say, we have to work with you. In Japan, you know, all the major players say, we have to work with you. You've got the key missing technology that we need to get into digital personal electronics. The telecom companies, not only in the United States, but in Europe and other parts of the world, say, we have to work with you. We see that telecommunications is going from analog to digital. You've got to have devices at the end of that line, and clearly Apple sees the vision, and you've got the user-centered technology. So there's a huge opportunity for Apple to create not just a new business for us, but to create even new industries in the 1990s that can be larger than the personal computer industry was in the 1980s. Here's the challenge, though. As we go from a single product company that is fighting it out in the streets in a commodity industry with Macintosh and winning, how do we implement as we go from a single product company to a multi-business company on a global scale with opportunities in personal computing with products with Macintosh, with enterprise computing with client server as that shift takes place in large corporate accounts, and then with personal electronics with a revolution that's going on as the world goes from analog to digital.
Yeah.
That's an incredibly big challenge for a company, even of Apple's size, to be able to do all of that. And I'd really like kind of your insights of how do we make that transition as a company, because implementation is going to be really tough for all of us.
I think this is probably on the minds of every employee at Apple, is our plate to full, number one, and how do we go from what we have and not let loose on what we have to bridge into this new brave world. I think the first prerequisite is that Macintosh keeps winning. It's said that even with lesser gross margin, once we can put innovation into the Macintosh and get more market, we need to have this as a growth business.
But let me ask a question, though, Michael, because you and I both been asked this question. Some people say, well, why spend all that time on this new stuff? Why worry about enterprise? Why worry about personal electronics? Why not just stick to our knitting, only do Macintosh, and let someone else worry about these new opportunities? Do you think that's sustainable?
No, it's not. It's not. We even at 15 or 18% market share, which we enjoy right now, coming from something like 8 in units, it's not sustainable because we will slowly and slowly be relegated to a niche player. We want to be a mainstream company, and it starts with having not a marginal share in Macintosh, but a much more substantial share. It has to say we have to build around the Macintosh. It's tough to win today because entries into the marketplace in this Intel Microsoft cartel have no barrier and cost to entry. They're setting these new price points, prefabricated and packaging this thing. Dell Computer is not a computer company. It's a distribution and packaging company. So is Packard Bell or Southgate or Eastgate or Westgate, all these names that are called the others. They are the major force in the market in terms of setting these low price points. And as I said before, we're not immune. So we've got to fight this by trying to put innovation, i.e. growth, back in the industry by having new applications, utilizing all these properties that we're going to work on in both systems design in the Mac and software. So that has to work. It's tough. It has to be implementation, month by month, quarter by quarter, year by year. If we blink on this, it's over. It isn't enough, though. And nobody else is excluded. If you look at the likes of Sun or DEC or IBM, they are not safe, even in their core business, because the world has moved beyond what their core competence was. People don't want mini computers and mainframes. People want stuff that we have.
Well, I think, and you made this point earlier on in the conversation, that we got our position with Macintosh in business because of our graphics, desktop publishing. But most of what was done in business was computation and transactions. Now that Windows is there, maybe we are still better and will continue to be for several more years, but some customers are coming back and saying, I don't care if your technology is better. What I want is something that I can buy from anybody, which will deal with not only graphics for creative use in audiovisual departments or graphic arts departments, but also will deal with transactions and computation. And in the client-server world, if we can't play in that, we will find not only our inability to grow further blocked, but we'll start to see that we'll see our share eroding further and further, and we'll actually become an isolated company once again. Yeah. So I think you're absolutely right. We have no choice but to go forward with enterprise. It would have been crazy to do it alone. So I think hooking up with IBM now 6 or 7 months later has turned out to be a very good decision. In the personal electronics, it isn't just about consumer electronics through retail stores. As you know, we've had at least one major airline who's looked at one of our products and say, you know, if you can deliver that product, and this is one that lets you play back information, which takes advantage of several of our technologies. It said, I can use that to do all of my documentation for all of my service and maintenance people, and I'd like 50,000 of those products over the next several years. Now, that's one airline. And as you start to expand that into training, into salespeople, there are going to be major business customers who are going to want these kinds of products. And that's why we've chosen to call them personal electronics, not consumer electronics, because they really cut right across commercial markets, education markets, not just consumer electronic markets.
But I think that we are probably still more technology rich than we are field effective, say. Take an example on briefing centers. When we have 2 visits a day from major corporations around the world coming through, and they see what we can do in providing tools to create business application, mission-critical applications, you like to cry when they say, we had no idea how good you are, including networking, pervasive networking, because that's built into System 7. We do this better than everybody else. Yet, how do we get this story out?
You know, if we can bring customers through, tell them a story, just as we're telling our Apple employees a story on this video, this is a powerful motivator to get them to understand that Apple is different. We are differentiated with innovation. We can implement. We're a multi-business company. We've got a future through the rest of the 90s. Those are powerful messages, and you can do that best when you can bring them on your own turf to a corporate briefing center. So I think we're going to have to look at how we train our people for different tasks as the channels change and as the customer requirements change. And so we really need to get our people thinking about, you know, how do I learn new tasks? That this is a lifelong learning experience, as we talk a lot with our education customers, but it affects us right here at home as well. And this is a global issue. Well, let's see if we can sum up some of these points, Michael. We started off by talking about the first building block for Apple in the 1990s, which is market share. We're making tremendous progress out there, but the industry is growing slower. We see the gross margins continuing to ease down. There's a lot of price pressure out there. We believe that if we get hit products and we can keep that sustainable, and I think the pipeline is filled with some very good candidates going out in the future, that we can continue to be able to gain market share. But in a slow growth industry, if we only grow at 5 to 10% revenue a year, that's not a very attractive business. We've got to get our business growing in the 10 to 15% range anyway with our base Macintosh business. And we can do that with much better implementation, training our people to be able to deal with the changes that have gone on in the industry, and just focusing on a global level on getting products out quickly so we get a fast return on these products, because the life in which a product is successful is getting shorter and shorter, whether it's a PowerBook or a desktop machine. In the enterprise area, we are now moving closer to getting real solutions out there, first with interoperability, second with PowerPC now, about less than 18 months away. PowerOpen is moving along well. Taligent is up and running. That's really a mid-1990s impact. And Kaleida is also taking shape. So all the efforts with IBM are going well. They play a key role in our future, but it's not the only role. And therefore, in addition to what we do with first building block of Macintosh market share, second building block of alliance with IBM on enterprise, we have a third building block, and that's about our futures with personal electronics. There we have a unique opportunity. No one else is better poised to convert their technologies into products and their products into businesses as Apple is, but this takes a great deal of management time to build new relationships with telecom companies, with content developers, with new channels like consumer electronics, and how we implement all of this at a time when we really aren't growing headcount for the company is a real challenge. And so I think we at the EMT level have got to start handing off, more accountability to managers down in the organization so that we can focus our time on some of these new growth businesses, but still know that we have got the major attention of our senior managers at Apple on our core. We can't take our eye off of the Macintosh core, even as we get excited about some of the new things like personal electronics.
Absolutely right. And I mean, that's where we try to bring in more process and not bureaucracy, process, fact-based decisions, more accountability. That's where AQM plays, and I'm thrilled about the progress that we made with applying the AQM process, not to demonstrate something, rather than to really make this part of everybody's life. And the consultant we had in early on said, Apple is, ask him, tell us where we are vis-a-vis other sort of renowned companies. He said, you're the fastest company after first year to have gone through adopting the principle. And there's tangible evidence of some of these success stories in multiple departments doing this. So in a lesser growth business that needs to be managed much more tightly, you can't do this without ever blinking on implementation, process management, accountabilities, and award process orientation rather than just the winging it type of management style. And that's where we try, as you pointed out, have to instill more pushing accountability and responsibility downwards into the organization and let us worry about the strategic options for Apple, but the running of the business is absolutely much more down in the organization itself with good data, fact-based management, and not saying just because I know something empirically I can make decisions.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right, and I think that the AQM, Apple Quality Management, is a great example of how we re-engineer work at Apple. So it isn't just about the quality control that goes on in the factory or the engineering labs. It's about quality that goes through the entire systemic process, including the relationship with the customer and a relationship with vendors and everything that we do. And I think in the 1990s that Apple has got to be on the leading edge of how we re-engineer work. That's where productivity comes from. We've got great tools to do that with. We've got very smart people. 70% of Apple employees are professionals, which is extraordinarily high ratio. And I think we need to get even more diversity in our management. We're very anxious, as you know, to get more women into management positions. We want more minorities. We want people of color moving into more senior positions. And these things won't happen unless you and I personally put our commitment behind it. And I know both of us feel very strongly about this. We want an Apple of the 1990s to not just be a company that succeeds by the numbers, but we want it to be an environment where people feel that this is a leading-edge company in every way.
And we have an extremely smart workforce. This is not smokestack at all. And so we have to have disagreements. We have to argue about how to do this thing. This is not top-down, in my opinion. But I think what we have set in place since 20 months, so to speak, is that we don't fight. We don't have major discrepancies of what's this all about. What we have to have is good arguments about how to do things, and that just brings people forward in excelling in their personality, in their style, and we see who can lead more and can take more. I have asked my managers to be absolutely vigilant on affirmative action and look at the work pool and employee base in widening what we have today. And that means women in higher positions. It means other groups coming forward. And so they are absolutely looking at that, how we can do this. Now, as we move around the country, I mean, we have made choices in Colorado and Austin. This has some challenges with it because what we had in Fremont, can we build this in Colorado? And so we have to look at all these aspects. But it's in people's mind. It is not an edict either. Is people are dealing with this at their managerial level. I'm pretty happy about the progress we made, that people absolutely live this rather than it's hokey or lip service or something.
Michael, I'd just like to finally make one comment about working together, because I think the way you and I work together is probably a pretty good symbol for the rest of the company. We've learned over the last 2 years that we've been able to get an awful lot done when we have one agenda and we work it as a team. I think the organization knows that you and I feel pretty comfortable working with each other, and they can talk to either one of us and they get the same consistent story, and we haven't changed in 2 years in terms of where we're headed. What we need to do is to make sure that symbolism gets translated throughout all parts of Apple. As we make this transition from single product company or a company with lots of technologies that wants to turn them into businesses, the only way we will implement it successfully is people working together. It's the cross-functionalization relationships, and it's the handoff of things from you and me and other members of the EMT. We've got to move more of the decision-making down into other layers of the organization. There's no more bandwidth left for us to do it. It's not good for the company, and we've got to develop people who can take on bigger and bigger roles in the management of what is a very large global corporation.
I think what we're doing is we're managing today as much as we prepare for the future.
Good. And I think that's a great close. Good to be with you all, and we look forward to keeping you abreast of the many changes and exciting things that are going on at Apple in the future.